Good evening and welcome to Defacto Review with Jargle Defacto, Terence Edwards and myself, Grace Brown. We're live on V Television as our Facebook page and channel. You can find us also on Twitter, #Defacto. So if you have any opinions on the topics that we're discussing, please tweet us and we'll try and bring you into the conversation. Coming up on the program.
Mongolia's government plans to privatize state-run companies after their debts tripled in just 3 years. Parliament passes a new decree to fight corruption in the country's politics. A new report by the United Nations warns that 2 billion children worldwide are breathing unsafe air. We'll be discussing the situation in Mongolia. And a Jurassic encounter after a giant dinosaur skull is unearthed in Darkhan.
Thank you for joining us. We begin with the government's plans to reform and privatize companies that were previously owned or run by the state. They fall under the former State Property Committee, which was recently shut down and absorbed into the Ministry of Finance and Cabinet Fund. Now, the proposed plans could affect about 100 Mongolian companies. It comes after a recent report that their debts tripled between 2012 and 2015. Terry, what's the latest?
So when you look at the numbers, it's pretty clear that this is a tremendous drag for the state economy. Last year, we saw 10.8 trillion tugrik owed to creditors compared to
About 3.5.
3.5 in 2012.
Yeah.
So when you have a fiscal crisis like we do today, for the short term, this is some money in the pocket, but for the long term, it's relieving a huge burden.
And so debts being what they owe creditors, but also their deficits have significantly increased, the difference between their liabilities and their assets, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So pretty bad straits at the moment for Mongolia's SOE, state-owned enterprises. Which companies could the plans affect? Who are we talking about here?
Well, we're looking at Darkhan Metallurgical Plant, the Darkhan Oil, the Mongolia Stock Exchange. Those are the real ones that you would think of first.
That's right. Now, Jargle, there's been a lot of skepticism as to why the State Property Committee was closed in the first place. It was said at the time that this was to reduce political influence in the management of state entities. What's your take?
State Property Committee, as you said, was abolished by the previous government, and this new government just established it back under new name, re-established it. It's called State Property Policy Coordinating Committee. And whatever it is called, the state wants to bring to some order in the house. And as Terry said, the house is not in order because they have increased the debt. Yet the state is in a big debt, foreign debt itself, the budget. So now the issue arriving from that, do we need a committee? Do we need the state property at all? So first of all, in that connection, I raised an issue of role of the government in the economy. Second, the capacity of the government. The third, the privatization issue. On first, the role of the government in the economy in Mongolia is becoming increasingly larger, which is against the general transition from centrally planned economy to market economy. And market economy is based on private property, not state property. First. Secondly, in Mongolia, state-owned enterprises are actually political party-owned enterprises, which you can prove when they change at every election the CEO of the state-owned companies. And
as we saw with Oyutolgoy recently.
With every state-owned companies, if the government status changes, they take over with the new political party nominees. So now the question is, state-owned enterprise, are they a political entity or economic entity? If it is economic entity, it should be profit-oriented, not debt-oriented. They should not increase at least the debt, the now 10 billion trillion tugrik is about what? About 4 billion US dollar, which is almost more than our foreign bonds. So it's raising very serious questions about the capacity of the state. The second point I want to raise, the capacity. If you choose leaders, CEOs of a company based on political biases,
they might not necessarily have the expertise for that industry.
That's exactly what's happening, and plus the bad thing is here, these CEOs not because they are fired without any contract, just because the government has changed it, then where's the responsibility? Where's the contract?
Yeah.
So this is the second concern about privatization. Now they talk about privatization of those companies, many companies. I'm not surprised at all, because just after election they always talk about privatization, in particular Miat, several other companies, and they never do it. Why? Because it is in not their interests. Because then they will lose airplanes that can take any time, free of charge, fly anywhere they want, without payment. Actually, it's costly, very costly, the engine, everything. So we pay for that. So I think privatization of state-owned enterprises in Mongolia must, and there should be first more public companies through stock exchanges, possibly Mongolian foreign stock exchanges. That's my take on the recent development on state-owned enterprises.
What about the issues of money laundering that were raised, that initially politicians had too much of a stake in these entities and were using it for their own personal gains?
State-owned enterprises, in particular its procurement, are based on now political connections. It not only makes the state-owned enterprises inefficient, but also it with big losses, because at times they buy something they don't need at all. So until we close this sort of corruption in the state-owned enterprises, which is kind of big source of Mongolian corruptions, we are stay in this current crisis, and it's very hard to go out of it with this sort of baggage of corruption.
Yeah,
I might add an example. You might look at the Talvintoga coal mine, where the Prime Minister's daughter and the Prime Minister himself were actually being investigated because there was a problem with some services her company provided to
They renewed that criminal
conflict
case.
of interest.
Yes.
And a son-in-law of the former Prime Minister Artung Hoyak got largest procurement deal, about 9 or so trillion tugriks. So this is a cause. It's just one of the big scandals happen in the country, but those scandals are slowly disappearing. That's the concern.
Exactly.
But as you say, they're very costly, and with Mongolia facing the current balance of payment crisis that it has,
Exactly.
reining in state-owned enterprises, making them more efficient and more profitable is an important step to reducing that. Well, earlier this week, the Member of Parliament, Enk Tuvshin, said that actually the sale of the Erdenet mine, Erdenet Mining Corporation, was made possible because the State Property Council was liquidated. That in fact, it was liquidated in order to facilitate that 49% share in EMC. What is your view on that?
Well, according to this Parliament member, Enk Tuvshin, who is one of the leaders of the current People's Party, it is timing-wise exactly happened in the way he had described it. State Property Committee is demolished, and then the Erdenet sale is happening, so that now de facto there's no entity straight. Ministry of Finance took over that responsibility. However, it was easier to control, and that's why 51% of the state-owned enterprises have no sound, no power, and that was, according to him, that's what was on the purpose planned action. So whatever it is, exactly it happened in that way or not happened in the way we talk about, of course, actually, the sort of corruptions, bad deals inside of state-owned enterprises.
The new board members of EMC were recently appointed. It now has 7 board members, 4 of which are chosen by the Mongolian government, which owns 51% of the entity, and the other 3 are selected by Mongolian Copper Corporation, which bought that 49% stake earlier this year, just before the election. So the new board now includes Ganbold, Mr. Ganbold, who previously served on Oyu Tolgoy's board, along with Mr. Orkon, the CEO of TDB, and Mr. Munkbold, who is from Munkbata, from Mongolian Copper Corporation. What is the biggest challenge that they are going to face in managing the new Erdenet?
So typically, Erdenet has been a profit-losing company, and that's just not going to fly going forward. It's often been called the piggy bank of politicians. If hopefully with the involvement of a private company, we can reverse that trend, because from what I understand, it's still a very large deposit, and there's a lot of benefit to be gained from it. So to squander this opportunity is pretty big problem.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest copper mines in Asia by some accounts, so hopefully they can make something of it. Now, turning to Mongolia's broader efforts to tackle corruption, according to the Independent Agency Against Corruption website, a long-awaited decree, which was pushed by President Elbegdorj last year, was passed by Parliament this week. Jargal, tell us more about this new anti-graft measure, why it matters.
Anti-Corruption National Program. That's the name of the law approved last week by the Parliament. And as you said, it was long expected, long waited, and it handled through last Parliament all the years. Why? Because 2002, Mongolia became a member of UN Anti-Corruption Agency, or coalition, whatever it is called, and according to that, we should have our own program. We should have a state entity who will take responsibility for that fighting against corruption. So Mongolia made first anti-corruption program 2002 for 2010 till 2010. That millennium start in 2010. This 10 years that program have been implemented. During this program, we have created an anti-corruption agency. Initially, it was effective, etc. But then, when it is finished, we need the second one, which took that long time, 2-3 years, even 5 years. Now, finally, we have it, this program. But if Mongolia has a program, it doesn't mean that it is implemented. It can be implemented, unfortunately. And I'm always saying that if Mongolia have done every plan, every program properly, we could live much better than in Switzerland, I believe. So, which is not the case. And today, this anti-corruption program will be the new feature of the program is it will be mostly controlled, checked by state anti-corruption agency, but it will be implemented at each government ministries, agencies. And it will be coordinated and checked by anti-corruption agency. That's good news. But the real good news will be when they started to implement it, which is not the case.
The Mongolian anti-corruption law was enacted in 1996, and it's also a party to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. What is the IAAC's role currently, and how will that change after this new decree?
Well, the key word here is independent agency against corruption. It's supposed to be an independent group that is outside of the political sphere. So it turns 10 years old next year, and there's been some problems brought up by groups such as Globe International that there is a problem with independence. Because there are appointments made directly by the president, some people see that there is too much control over their agenda.
Yeah, the OECD released a report just over a week ago criticizing the procurement of services and appointment of judges in Mongolia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to get to your question more specifically, they are the watchdogs over politicians to make sure they are standing in line with Mongolia's laws, not getting involved with corruption and bribery.
Mm. And will that role change now that we have this new decree?
Hard to say. There was a new organization proposed that was rejected without discussion by Parliament. But they do have a new proposal to discuss. We'll see what happens in the future. At this moment, we don't have too many details.
Yeah. Well, what...
Expectation is high.
Yeah.
But actually, Mongolia, since the program has adopted, early at the start of millennium, I think Mongolian corruption had increased. And it comes to such a level.
Or reporting of corruption.
Very funny thing is reporting is also increased. That means also probably the cases are increased. But however, larger scandals, corruption cases, raising very strongly all around, then slowly disappearing. And it was the case brought by another parliament member at the discussions of that program. They said, look, high-ranking officials involved with corruption cases are slowly disappearing. Will it be changed with this new program? That is a big question in front of Mongolian society today.
Well, I have to point out, though, since the transition to a new government, we've seen so many new investigations into former authorities. So I actually
But this happens every time there's a change in government, though, doesn't it?
So I would actually expect when the time comes for Transparency International's corruption perception index, Mongolia is going to fall down on their score in maybe some places.
What was the problem with the previous system of anti-corruption? Apparently only mid and lower level officials were being investigated, is that right?
The problem was big cases started, they opened the file, and then slowly it disappeared. Because now we have so many cases involved political leaders, political party leaders, high-ranking officials, ministers, but those are slowly disappearing in this country. The main reason is there's no differences between political parties now. Whoever is in the power, they are becoming corrupt. And now I think this non-transparent businesses control not only one party, the whole parties, interconnected. And those are becoming stronger so that these cases slowly disappear. That's very unfortunate situation in the country.
Well, turning now to an issue that affects all of us in Mongolia, air pollution. A new report by the United Nations Children's Fund has found that 2 billion children worldwide are breathing in air that is, according to the World Health Organization, unsafe. Here in Ulaanbaatar, the German-Mongolian Institute for Research and Technology says that air pollution in the winter is 20 times the WHO safe limit, and in Gur districts up to 40 times that limit. So, you know, right now, this is actually, according to those measures, that would far surpass some of the averages in Beijing. What are some of the key public health concerns related to Mongolia's air pollution?
First of all, I mean, it's the #1 public health issue, the air quality. But the only problem with us is, we remember this ant and grasshoppers fairy tale. They agreed to work all summer and to prepare good for winter. But when winter comes, grasshopper comes and knocks the door of ant. I'm frozen, please, let me come in. Then a ant says, what you have been doing, grasshopper, for whole summer? He said, oh, I was so busy singing. And then ant said, okay, then now if you have spent all your summer singing, then you spend all your winter now dancing. That was the answer. So the Mongolians, we are like this, because now we are, in summer comes, we forget about air quality, all the smoke issues. When now it comes, the air becomes like this, as you have described it, then now we start to talk. Yeah. That's very unfortunate, first. Secondly, there are many programs the government implemented, several billion US dollars projects. Certain part of it is just wasted. Certain corruption cases are there now. But the remaining part changed 40% of Ger district households' stove with the more efficient stove. And the smoke, even if you fire coal, you cannot see much. It's so clean.
The clean burning
But
stoves,
what happened was, according to a recent newspaper, a journalist came to several parts of the city and checked who is burning what and what is the cost. Prices are different, of course, depending on location, depending on the quality of coal. But the terrible thing is they not only sell those coals from different sources, different mines, but there are certain points where they sell car tires.
That's right, yeah,
for
burning rubber.
Yeah.
And the rubber burned there, tires in particular burned, they buy very cheap, and they say it keeps all day. And yet this burning, the smoke, the whole chemicals are so dangerous.
Yeah.
And it is the practice is getting extended. So those stoves using or firing using the rubbers are replacing those effects of the 40% who is using more efficient stove. And now we have a more pollution.
And particularly as the economic crisis deepens and we have
That's why
6-year high with unemployment and falling incomes, falling currency value.
Correct.
Coal
So
is more expensive.
Remember, 20% of the country are poor, according to the world classification. Another 20% are ready to switch to any directions.
So clean air becomes a luxury that not all Mongolians can afford.
That's unfortunately what's happening, and that's unfortunately remind us the program of housing of low-income people, which was not the case. Low-income housing was not never made. It is the 30,000 apartments are staying now idle, and yet 170,000 families want to have apartments. So that's the concern.
So it's very much an economic issue. Well, the government is trying to resolve this. It announced last week that from March 31st, electricity costs in the Ger district will be halved to try and make it easier for families.
At night.
At night,
yes.
Between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. But is this a little bit too little, too late? I mean, this is coming after winter, which is when families surely need it most.
They try to do that earlier. And if it happens, it would be good effect for poor family, the low-income family. But however, the system that can use the power and heat is expensive. So it's minimum 500,000 2 weeks.
They're not efficient energy heaters, electric heaters. What's important to know is the Ger districts is ground zero for this crisis.
Yeah.
And some of the effects are infant mortality, pneumonia killing off
Exactly.
the elderly and the very young.
And the leading cause of death in kids under age 5, according to that same UNICEF report.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
there's untold long-term effects, including asthma and certain cancers, heart diseases. So it's really important to realize that this is a problem affecting Mongolia's poorest and most vulnerable.
Absolutely. Well, something, at least that could offer hope next week, the COP22 Global Climate Summit will get underway in Morocco. So at least air pollution will be a bigger focus for the global media then, along with other climate-related issues. Well, finally, to end on something a little more positive, a new dinosaur discovery in Darkhan was made last week after a herder chanced upon an enormous fossilized skull. It's 80 by 35 centimeters, almost a meter, pretty big.
The skull.
And it's said to be it's said to belong to, oh my goodness, I'm going to try and say this right, the Rhinoceratoidae. I swear I practiced that, and it's still really hard to say. The Rhinoceratoidae, which is, as you might guess, related to the rhinoceros family. Do we have any more news on this, Terry?
Well, there was an enormous footprint found, 106 centimeters.
That's right.
77 centimeters wide.
In September.
Yes.
That's right, in the Gobi Desert.
Also, the Hollywood actor Nicolas Cage.
Yes, when's he bringing it back? Or when's it coming back?
$240,000 he spent for buying that dinosaurs, and he's giving back to Mongolia.
Because it was on the black market. He was not aware.
He was unaware.
Well, on that black market, my comment would be, so many dinosaurs turned out silently crossed the Mongolian border and sold in these sort of black markets. So I'm wondering if such a dinosaurs can cross Mongolia silently or secretly, what other things could cross that border? That's my worry on that note.
Well, Mongolia has tried to prevent this. It banned the export of dinosaur fossils back in 1924, I believe. But as you say, there's still a lot of work to be done in raising awareness about Mongolia's incredible dinosaur fossils and also protecting them. What are your favorite dinosaurs?
Whoa. That's anything I saw in Jurassic Park. And by the way, Jurassic Park people got the idea from Mongolia, from the Flaming Cliff. Andrew Chapman. He brought that time even some dinosaurs to US, and they came here before they made the movie.
Well, there you go. I don't know, I'm a fan of the Bartosaurus. Well, that brings this edition of Defacto Review to an end. Thank you very much for joining us. You can keep up with all of us on Twitter. So hope you can tune in again next week. From Jargosaurus, T-Rex, and myself, Saichen Emrare, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening.
Mongolian Mining Journal. Монголын үл урхай эдийн засгийн талаар Англи-Монгол дээрх анализ судалгаа байр суурийг манай сэтгүүлчдийн мэргэшсэн баг танд хүргэж байна. Бидэнтэй холбогдох утас 77 22 24 тэгтэг 77 22 тэг 2 тэгтэг. Mongolian Mining Journal.
Кармелэн брэнд нь өөртөө ихтэй бүсгүйчүүдэд зориулан Лондон хотноо уралсан гоёмсог загварын бүтээл юм. Хувцас нэг бүрт онцлог шинжийг тусган гараар уралдаг ба дээд зэргийн оёдлын техник, тансаг зэрэглэлийн давуу болон гоёлууд нь Кармелэн брэндийн үнцийн түүхийг илэрхийлж байдаг. Кармелэн